16,000 tons. That is the weight of a modern, fully armed destroyer. It's steel, armor, and missile launchers. And the official story tries to convince us that our ancestors dragged this weight across rough terrain using hemp ropes and wooden rollers. Stop. Just picture it for a moment. Do you hear the cracking of wood? Those are logs splintering under pressure that exceeds the breaking point of timber tenfold. Do you feel the ground turning to mush because the soil physically cannot support such a concentrated load? This isn't a matter of hard work. It's a matter of physics. And this is where the official story falls apart. We were taught in school that the oceans were walls, that ancient civilizations lived in isolation, like animals in different zoo cages, that they knew nothing of each other. But the stone record screams otherwise. I look at the polygonal masonry in Peru, then at the granite blocks in Egypt, then at the megaliths in Japan. It's the same signature. A single engineering standard. A stone processing protocol that we cannot replicate even today. The wind whistles through the gaps between the slabs, where you can't even fit a razor blade. You touch the cold granite and realize this isn't the primitive labor of thousands of slaves. This is technology. A global, unified logistics system that ignored distances and oceans. I know how this sounds. Believe me, I'm a skeptic. I believe in material strength and theoretical mechanics, not myths. But I have a calculator, and I have geological reports. And when you place them next to a history textbook, the numbers don't add up. The timeline is bursting at the seams. We're used to thinking that we were the ones who mapped the world, that we conquered the oceans. But the facts suggest that someone knew this planet much better than we do, thousands of years before Christopher Columbus. And that someone left behind traces that are impossible to erase, but very convenient to ignore. Now we're going to look at a document that shouldn't exist. A map depicting something hidden under miles of ice. The year is 1513, Constantinople. A Turkish admiral, Piri Reis, comes into possession of documents he himself calls ancient. He doesn't hide this. In the margins, the admiral writes plainly, "I am not the creator of this map. I am merely a compiler." He consolidates data from 20 different sources, some dating back to the era of Alexander the Great, and others even older. Official history tells us this is just a pretty picture, the fantasy of a medieval cartographer. But let's look at the bottom edge of the map, to the place that is now an icy wasteland. Queen Maud Land, Antarctica. On the Piri Reis map, this coast is free of ice. Mountain ranges are drawn there. Riverbeds flowing into the ocean are marked. The terrain is complex and rugged. For decades, historians laughed at this. Look, they drew land where there are only icebergs. The laughter stopped in 1958. That was the year the United States Air Force conducted a seismic survey of this sector of Antarctica. Instruments pierced the ice sheet with sound waves to find out what lay beneath. And when the bedrock profile was laid on the geologist's table, it was no laughing matter. The terrain under the mile-thick ice sheet perfectly matched the admiral's map. Think about that. Not approximately, not similar, but with an accuracy that requires knowledge of spherical trigonometry and geodetic surveying. Now let's do the math. This is simple arithmetic that kills the official version. Geologists confirm the last time this coast was free of ice was at least 6,000 years ago, by the most conservative estimates. 6,000 years. That's long before Sumer, long before Egypt, at a time when our ancestors, according to textbooks, had barely learned to fire pottery and form tribes. Someone was conducting a cartographic survey of an entire continent. You'll say, coincidence. You'll say, they guessed. You can't guess the location of a riverbed hidden under a mile of ice. You can't accidentally draw a mountain range where the eye cannot see it. This is not a fantasy. It is a document. And it tells us one terrifying thing. Someone saw the Earth in a way that we have only seen with satellites and sonar. This wasn't magic. This was technology. Knowledge of longitude. Knowledge of projection. Global reach. Official science calls this a copying error. But the numbers say otherwise. The Piri-Reis map is a surviving fragment of a database from a civilization that commanded logistics on a planetary scale. And if their knowledge of geography makes you nervous, just wait. Because knowledge is one thing, but physical power is something else entirely. We've looked at the map. Now let's look at what they built. And believe me, what we see next contradicts more than just history. It contradicts the laws of physics as we understand them. Let's travel to China, to an object that makes modern cranes look like children's toys. We're in China, Jiangsu province, 20 kilometers from Nanjing. Here, in the abandoned Yangshan quarry, lies something that shatters the backbone of the official story. Not metaphorically, physically. Imagine a cliff. You get closer and realize it's not a natural formation. It's a block, separated from the mountain and carved. The base of the so-called Stele of Eternal Glory. The official version states 15th century. The Yongle emperor commissioned a monument to his father. Workers quarried 3 gigantic blocks to be assembled later. Sounds logical, right? Right up until you pick up a calculator. Let's do the math. The weight of the stele's base is 16,000 tons. I'll repeat that. 16,000 tons. To give you a sense of scale, a modern, fully armed destroyer weighs about 8,000 to 9,000 tons. This stone is heavier than 2 warships. The world's most powerful crawler crane, the Liebherr LR 13,000, can lift 3,000 tons. And that is the limit of modern engineering, the peak of our capabilities. To move the block at Yangshan today, we would need 6 of these behemoths working in perfect synchronization. The slightest error, and the machinery would be scrap metal. And now we are asked to believe that in the 15th century they were planning to move this with ropes and logs. Historians say they planned to wait for winter, flood the road with water, and drag the stone over the ice. Stop. That sounds nice in a travel guide, but it's nonsense from a material strength perspective. The pressure of such a mass on the ground would be colossal. An ice road under 16,000 tons would have shattered into rubble. The logs would have turned to splinters instantly. The stone would have sunk into the ground like a knife through butter. You cannot defy physics by imperial decree. You stand next to this wall of stone. The silence of the quarry is deafening. You run your hand along the edge. This is not a rough break. It's a technological cut. The gaps between the blocks, where they are joined, are millimeter perfect. And this raises the most inconvenient question. Officially, the project was abandoned because the architects suddenly realized they couldn't move the stones. Seriously? You quarry 30,000 cubic meters of rock, spend years of labor from thousands of people, and only at the very end do you realize it's too heavy? No, this wasn't a planning error. Yangshan is not an unfinished project from the 15th century. It is the ruin of something much more ancient, something that possessed the technology to work with such weights. The Yongle emperor simply found these pre-made blocks and tried to claim these pre-made blocks and tried to claim them as his own. Like a tribesman who finds a stalled tank and tries to hitch horses to it. The horses couldn't pull it, and the tank remained. But if China seems like an isolated case of gigantomania, then look at the map. Because we see this engineering signature elsewhere, there is a standard. A global construction standard that ignores borders, oceans, and eras. They built the same way in Asia, Europe, and South America. And the next fact proves it. They were connected. Let's jump 8,000 kilometers to the west. Ireland, County Carlow. The Brownshill Dolmen. Green fields, a light rain, a bone-chilling wind. And in the midst of this pastoral scene stands a granite slab weighing 100 tons. 100 tons. To give you a sense of scale, that's the weight of 2 modern battle tanks, or the weight of 150 cars compressed into a single monolith. But let's turn off the Irish rain and crank up the heat. Let's travel to where the stone bakes in the sun. Jordan, Syria, the Black Desert. Here begins a story that breaks the official timeline even more brutally than the 100-ton capstone in Ireland. Because in Ireland, we see weight. But here, we see perspective. The 1920s. Pilots of the British Royal Air Force are flying over the desert. Below is scorched earth, basalt, and sand. The drone of the engine, an open cockpit, the wind in their faces. And suddenly, one of them looks down and can't believe his eyes. The desert is covered in drawings. Below, stretching for hundreds of kilometers, are giant geometric figures. Perfect circles, spirals, strange shapes resembling kites. They are called kites, and this is where it gets interesting. The part that textbooks prefer to mention in small print footnotes. If you go down to the ground, to the spot where the pilot saw a perfect circle, you will see nothing. You will see chaos. A pile of knee-high stones, walls half a meter high, a meter at most. They stretch somewhere over the horizon, meandering and breaking. From the ground, it looks like rubble, like the remains of a sheep pen built by a drunk shepherd. You can only understand the shape, appreciate the geometry, and see the design from one vantage point. An altitude of 300 meters. Think about that for a second. Official history tells us these were built by primitive hunters. Supposedly, they were enclosures for wild animals. Gazelles were herded into narrow corridors and killed. Sounds logical, right? I understand why this version is convenient. It's simple. A primitive man wants to eat, so he builds a pen. But now let's apply some engineering logic and a calculator. The diameter of some of these structures is 400 meters. The walls are kilometers long. This is thousands of tons of basalt that had to be found, dragged, and laid. You are an ancient builder. You don't have a drone. You don't have a satellite. You don't even have a tall mountain nearby. This is a flat plateau. How do you maintain the perfect geometry of a circle half a kilometer in diameter if you cannot see the pattern?
It's like trying to draw a perfect portrait on a football field by crawling on the grass, never once climbing up to the stands. It is physically impossible without a coordinator from above. And the second blow to the official version: if this is a pen for livestock, why the perfect geometry? A gazelle doesn't care if it dies in a crooked pen or a perfectly circular one. A hungry hunter doesn't waste extra calories on aesthetics, he builds a fence. But here, we see mathematics. The margin of error in these walls, at such scales, is centimeters. You might say, maybe it was a ritual, for the gods. Fine, let's assume that. But then why are the walls so low? Half a meter of stone. This isn't a wall, it's a curb. A child could step over it. It's not a barrier. It's a marking.
I've looked at archaeological reports. They find animal bones there and gleefully exclaim, "Aha! We told you! Hunting!" But this is survivorship bias. If I find cat bones in the basement of the Hermitage Museum, it doesn't mean the Winter Palace was built as a litter box. The function of these walls is baffling if you consider them walls. But if you consider them lines on a blueprint, everything falls into place. This is a geodetic grid, a navigational marker, a language spoken to those who were in the sky. Imagine the amount of work. Tens of thousands of people moving millions of stones in the scorching heat. There is no water. There is no shade. They are building something they will never see in its entirety. They are building a sign whose meaning is only revealed from the altitude of modern aviation. Why? Official science says coincidence or cult. Engineering logic says this is infrastructure. We look at these circles and see the same thing we see at the Nazca lines. Only here, it's made of heavy basalt and is much older. The dating of the kites goes back 5, 7, maybe even 9,000 years. At a time when, according to the official version, we were supposed to be running around with digging sticks, someone was marking the planet like an airfield. But if the Middle East is the blueprint, where is the terminal itself? Where is the base? To find the answer, we must go to a place where historians have committed perhaps the dirtiest crime against the truth. To the heart of Africa. To a place where, amid the jungles and savannas, stands a city that, according to all textbooks, could not have existed. A place they tried to steal from an entire continent, just to avoid admitting the obvious. Picture the heat, the dry savanna air that burns your lungs. Southern Africa. A place where, according to all the maps of official history, there should only be huts made of sticks and clay. And suddenly, granite. Not just stones, a complex. Walls 11 meters high. That's the height of a modern 4-story building. 250 meters in circumference. And not an ounce of mortar, not a drop of binding agent. Welcome to Great Zimbabwe. The place where academic science committed one of its most egregious crimes against logic. When German geologist Karl Mauch stumbled upon these ruins in 1871, he experienced cognitive dissonance. He looked at the local people living in simple dwellings, then at the perfect masonry that had stood for centuries, and said, "Impossible." 19th century European science simply refused to believe that Africans could have mastered higher engineering mathematics. A circus began. They invented any other possible builder. Phoenicians? Sure. The Queen of Sheba? Of course. A lost Roman legion? Why not? They were willing to attribute this construction to aliens or ghosts rather than admit the obvious. Here, deep in the continent, the same technology was at work as in Peru. Get closer to the wall. Feel the cold stone. This is dry stone masonry. The blocks are fitted so tightly that a knife blade cannot pass between them. The walls have a characteristic inward slope, a curvature. Engineers know this isn't for aesthetics. It's for anti-seismic protection. It is material strength embodied in granite. Who was calculating load vectors in a primitive tribe? But the most terrifying feature is inside. In the center of the so-called Great Enclosure stands the conical tower, 10 meters high. And this is where the official story of a chief's palace shatters. Walk around it. Look for an entrance. Look for windows. Look for a staircase. They don't exist. The tower is solid. It is not a room. It is a monolithic column of thousands of tons of granite. tightly packed within an outer shell. Why? Historians mumble about a symbol of power or a granary. Seriously? A granary you can't put grain into? A symbol of power that requires moving millions of kilograms of rock just for its shape? It's nonsense.
An engineer looks at this and sees something else.
A solid tower surrounded by a screening wall. It looks like a technical core, an insulator, something meant to dampen vibrations or shield radiation. I don't know what it was, but I know for certain what it wasn't. It wasn't a dwelling or a temple. And look at the geography. If you overlay maps of currents and winds, Great Zimbabwe is a perfect transit hub between the Middle East and South America. Take a photo of the masonry from Zimbabwe. Take a photo from Cusco, Peru. Mix them up. Show them to a professional stonemason. He will tell you it was built by the same crew. One signature, one processing standard, the same telltale nubs on the blocks. The distance between them is thousands of kilometers of ocean. The time difference, according to the official version, is centuries. But the stone says that's a lie. Official history tried to steal this achievement from Africa because it broke their worldview. But granite cannot lie. It stands there, amid the savannah, a silent rebuke to our textbooks. We found a map of Antarctica. We found markings in the desert. We found a base in Africa. A global network is taking shape. Logistics, infrastructure. But if a network of such colossal power existed, where did it all go? Why do these complexes stand abandoned, as if the staff was evacuated in a single hour? To understand the end of this drama, we need to gather all the evidence into one file and ask a question that is truly chilling. Let's just lay it all out on the table. No emotion, just the raw data. A map of Antarctica with ice-free rivers. 16,000 tons of granite, abandoned in a Chinese quarry because we can't lift it even today. Identical seismic-resistant interlocking stones in Peru, Egypt, and Zimbabwe. Navigational markers in the Jordanian desert, visible only from a bird's-eye view. Do you see coincidence here? Official history tells us these were disparate cults. They were just praying to stones. But engineering says something else. The probability of 5 different civilizations, separated by oceans and with no contact, independently inventing the exact same standard of polygonal masonry, is 0. The probability that they independently chose the same geometry for celestial alignment is 0. This isn't religion. It's a protocol. We are trying to explain the workings of a supercomputer with only a stone axe in hand. We call things temples that might have been technical hubs. We call things ritual bowls that look like chemical reactors. We look at the most complex logistical network on the planet and see only a pile of rocks, because we have been forbidden to think otherwise. The next 2 or 3 years promise to be a turning point. New data from laser scanning, LiDAR, in the Amazon forests is already revealing million-person cities where only wild tribes were thought to have lived. Ice cores from Antarctica are being re-examined. And this is where the official version finally dies. Full stop. It cannot withstand the weight of the facts. You cannot build a global system without global navigation. You cannot move 16,000 tons with enthusiasm and ropes. It is physically impossible. Which means there was something else, a technology we lost, or one that was taken from us. I understand why this picture is frightening. To acknowledge a single precursor civilization is to admit that humanity does not develop in a straight upward line. It means admitting that we are a civilization with amnesia, living on the ruins of giants. We are proud of our iPhones and rockets, but we cannot replicate what they did with granite. And the scariest part isn't that they existed, it's that they are gone. If a global system of such power, with such logistics and energy existed, who or what could have wiped it from the face of the earth almost instantly? Why were the quarries abandoned with tools still in hand? Why were the cities emptied? This doesn't look like a gradual decline. It looks like a purge. Check the list of sources in the description. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. That would be foolish. Check the friction calculations for the block at Yangshan. Look up the seismology reports on Antarctica from 1958. Compare the photos of masonry from Cusco and Great Zimbabwe. Do it yourself. Save this video before the algorithms decide this information violates community standards. And be sure to watch the next episode. We'll be analyzing what was found underwater off the coasts of Japan and Cuba. The scale there is even more terrifying. But for now, answer one question for yourself. If someone could flip the switch on a civilization that moved mountains, why do you think that switch can't be flipped again?